You're listening to Gone Mobile, your input and output for all things .NET MAUI and mobile.
Welcome back to another Gone Mobile. Hey, Alan, what kind of coffee are you drinking today?
You know what kind of coffee I'm drinking. You call it my swill. You call it.
I mean, that's being kind. But
I mean, John would have me buying a machine that measures the atomic weight of a hair and has some sort of shower thing that drips into it. And then it's got like this glass with like the leather is made from the same stuff they make Kobe beef. So I don't know. Yeah. It's called Chemex, right? Is that the
that's the particular one that I like to use. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a chemistry station, is what it is.
Yeah, I mean but you know what? It's back to like the simple days of making coffee. It's just the basics, right?
Except it takes water. How long does it take you to make a cup of coffee, John?
It doesn't take that long. It's like
How
40
long?
seconds to grind the beans, and then the water's heating up while that happens, right?
Yeah, and the beans also need a special grinder too. You can't just be a Black and Decker because you made
can't
fun of my Black.
Just smash them with a hammer or something, right? Like
I have a grinder, but you said
you have a spice grinder. You don't have a coffee grinder. The
it
ones
says
with the
coffee
blades,
grinder right on it. Yes.
Well, they lied to you. I'm sorry to tell you.
Okay. So going back to how long it takes you. How long do you before you have a cup to mouth?
Maybe 5-6 minutes tops.
No, you've told me over and over 15 minutes.
No. But you know what? This actually reminds me. Did I ever tell you about the coffee scale that I was building? I think I did, right?
Yes, I remember your IoT project.
Yeah. We should do an episode on IoT.NET stuff too.
Is that gonna? Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Is that going to measure the atomic weight of your coffee and water at the same time too?
That's where I kind of ran into problems. Is I needed to find a better. So like, yeah, I mean that was good content for another episode, right? Like talking about. I love the interaction of like the real world stuff with programming, but I had to figure out a better way to do the scale part of it. The thing that I used was not accurate enough at all. I mean, it was at least a couple hairs off. So
yeah,
microns.
Yeah. I enjoy my coffee because it takes about 30 seconds to make it. And then I add water. It tells me when I've done something stupid. It tells me when I need to clean it. I am a dumbass when it comes to coffee, and I am all right because, again, it's 30 seconds from cup to mouth. Done.
One day, maybe we'll fix that.
We'll see.
But it's not going to be today.
But
speaking of other things that maybe one day we'll fix.
maybe. But at least we can talk about it, right? The wonderful world of XAML.
Ooh,
the wonderful
XAML.
world. Now, I like XAML. I'm going to be honest. I am a XAML sympathizer.
I think you either love it or you hate it as a person.
I mean, I do a lot of React. I've done a lot of the in-code stuff, like from Community Toolkit and stuff. I love it. I love the Community Toolkit code. I do love my React. I guess I'm not picky. But XAML's very verbose. And some of the stuff I see in XAML, there's a customer I'm working with right now who I love. They're fantastic, but they have a love for XAML, like a deep love for XAML.
They put everything in, so do you, with your XAML, do you put like how serious are you? Do you put like all of your, like, I see some people stick like the view model declaration in the binding context in the XAML file, right? Like, so that's all markup, which you can totally do.
But then
you probably don't,
because
then
don't do that.
I don't. I'm just saying. I've seen it.
They don't do that. Thankfully, they are on the DI bus for their view models and stuff. But they have a love for everything being in XAML, and I'm like, my dudes, we got to get to the view models, man. Do you know why? Because they're very easy to unit test, and these guys love their code coverage. Like in other projects on their server side, they love their, all those metrics coming in, and they love being able to test it right there. But the more you get into the XAML with stuff like converters, right? The more you get over there, the more kind of, I don't want to call it spaghetti, but certainly separated code bits, and it goes more over to the UI, right?
Yeah.
And really, it's like, do as much as you can in that view model.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
and
call me
that's
wrong.
no, well, and that's I mean, if you're talking to maybe some purist in how you're separating your concerns of things there, right? Like that's something that I feel like I've seen so many people over the years be like, wow, you shouldn't put that in the view model because that's like the place that is more your pristine business logic that shouldn't have anything to do about how the view is constructed. And it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, if you're choosing sometimes between I need to get this thing into my XAML, and either I have to write yet another converter, or I just like add one more property that maybe just even as a read-only wrapper around something else. Like, I don't know.
Do you? How many converters on average do you have?
So,
Just
I mean, on average is hard because I don't really have many apps, right? I have one app, so I have my average is skewed by the one app. I have a lot of converters in it. I don't know if I've counted them. No. But this is because I carried a lot of legacy stuff over from my early days of building this app where, it was like, oh yeah, you're supposed to write converters to do this. You shouldn't, add a property that inverts the Boolean property on your view model because that's not the right way to do it. That's not the pure way to do it. So I have some of that kind of stuff, and I have some interesting ones. I think I mentioned the one to you where I've got, this might be over engineered. I'll be willing to wager that, but I have because I'm doing Blazor web, right, WASM, and I'm doing Maui. I have a formatted. So Maui has the concept of a formatted string, and I think it's formatted string, right? That's the name.
Yes.
Okay, because I'll get to this in a second. Anyway, the formatted string is basically a way for you to have a bunch of text in a label without having a bunch of labels. So like in my pool app, I have like in my log timeline, one of my logs is like, oh, you added X amount of Y chemical, at Z strength to your pool. And so I have all that information. I want to display that, and I want to have like the chemical amount to be like maybe slightly bolder and maybe a different color than the chemical type, because the chemical types I try and group by kind of like what they impact, like what measure of the pool chemistry they impact. So all of the ones that impact like the chlorine levels are a certain color. And then I have the amount. Did I say the amount? I had the amount. Yeah. I don't know. There was another
Doesn't
piece
matter.
there.
There's a whole bunch of bound properties that you have.
Right. So like I could do those all in individual properties on the view model, and I could have 3 or 4 different labels in a layout to set that all up, or I can have one label, right? And all of the platforms have some concept of this kind of label that has like spans of text that are different styles and stuff. So Android does this, Windows does this, iOS does this, and so it's more performant to do one label like that than to have a bunch of Maui labels that create more instances of the native control to back them and do all that. So I think there's a good reason for me to use the formatted string and for others to do so as well. So coming back to the whole converter thing, to make that all abstracted across like web and Maui, I introduced a new thing that I call formatted text, which is why I always confuse the name with formatted string, because I'm like, which one is the native one? And so formatted text like takes the concept of what's the font size, the color, the font itself, and then it gets even more crazy when you start introducing, like I have a lot of font icons, and I'll mix those in with those into the labels too, right? So I might have like a font icon, and I use a symbol character to show like, I don't know, well, actually I do this for weather conditions. So I'll do one label, and I'll have like a cloud if it's cloudy, or a sun if it's sunny, or rains if it's raindrop if it's rainy, and I'll mix that in with like the temperature value and the wind speed and all the different stuff there. So multiple fonts and stuff. So I abstracted that all out, and then at the end of it all, I have a converter that takes a formatted text object and converts it into a formatted string. I think that's an okay use of it.
You're definitely going to have the purists throwing spears at you.
Yeah, who cares?
Well, that's the other thing. Do what works for you.
Right.
Now,
and it works
the
for me in both places, right? Like if it's on the Blazor side, it actually worked out well. I'm like, oh, I got this thing. I just turn it into whatever, HTML or whatever things I need to do there. And it all just comes together. It's lovely.
and it renders. Hey, if it works, it works.
Yep.
But let's be fair. You can go nuts with converters. So I've seen projects with many converters, many. Like, I want to say the worst I've seen is like 40. 40
I
converters.
probably have more than that.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
But again, I
so
could probably do an audit and get rid of half of them and live life happily.
I get by with 2. And the only reason I have 2 is for easy reasons. One is inverse of Boolean.
Yeah.
Everybody has that. I wish it was built into XAML. I could do it with data triggers and all that stuff, but it gets kind of...
Community Toolkit ships a bunch of those now too, right?
Yeah, but I think everybody and their uncle has an inverse bool,
Right,
or calls it like knots or something, right? But yes, it's out of the box in Community Toolkit, thank God, because I think just about everybody uses it.
Talking about a lot of converters, they have a lot. They have probably 40 converters in there now too.
Well, whatever you love, I guess. Yeah. I'm going to say though that I have seen a lot of business logic leak into them. I've seen a lot of so going back to the 2 I have the inverse. Obviously, everybody has that.
Can I guess the other
double.
one? Oh,
yeah,
I was going to guess it.
Yeah,
well, I know that's the actual answer, but I was gonna suggest that. Are you really you have one converter, and one of your converter parameters is like, what's the type of converter, and then you just have a mega converter.
It's a double to like a numeric, right?
Yeah.
So I can check the target. Not a big deal. It's just because double doesn't come out of the box in binding for Maui or Xamarin Forms. So I've had it for a long time. It's
and nullable numbers can be a pain too with out of the box. I have some of those, right? Nullable double converter.
I think there's other ways I deal with that though. I don't usually tend to bind nullable. I'm able to tell. Like dates, fine. You could say dates. There's some weird stuff you got to do there. There's cases right now where I do date only or time only.
Okay.
Which I wish came out of the box, but it doesn't. It's still minor. Usually in the view model, I can end up flipping those over to just to my DTOs manual anyway. So not a big deal. It is what it is. But like I said, I've seen places where a lot of business logic begins to leak in these, like this specific enum to this specific value, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't work because enums grow, right? So you don't really want to start mixing too much of that stuff. What's another good one? Well, like you said, nulls to just about everything, enums to just about everything.
I have had a case, and I don't remember the specifics. I know I've done like something like bool to grid length or something like that, like where
that's weird.
Well, no, but there was a good case for it where I think
visibility.
It was visibility, and if I didn't do it that way, my layout became enormously more complex or nested. So I was like, I really do want to use a grid, and I just want to hide some columns so they collapse or some rows so they collapse. So yeah.
Now, for some of these things, you could do data triggers. The problem with those is that you'll develop carpal tunnel syndrome really quick having to do those. Right? It's very verbose. It's a lot of flip and typing, and they don't always reset the same way. Right? You have to have all of the stuff you change reset back, and a lot of people don't realize that. Right? It doesn't just kind of return.
Yeah.
So you end up mapping both sides of the equation fully. To do the things you want to do. And it's a lot of typing. It's huge. Now, the other thing I tend to see people use is, and I don't use these at all, so maybe I'm stupid, but I don't use like XAML extensions at all. Like they're just at all.
Like to give me an example of ones that you see.
Localization is the biggest one.
Okay.
Now, people do localization different. I am hardcore that belongs in the view model because a lot of the messages you're going to format, a lot of the validation is going to come out of your view model, right? So I'm not big on that being separate for the case of the page because my view model is going to have to deal with it anyways. So what I've been doing is notoriously binding with against the dictionary, right? So dictionary of strings. and you can go binding, brace bracket, the value, close brace bracket, and it binds. And that's it. It works beautiful. And then you can, if it's in the dictionary, there you go, right? It's out of the box. It's very easy. I don't need an extension. It's just a normal binding.
Yeah. Well, and I think what was I haven't looked at it, the code in a while, but like you built into Shiny the localization, the source generator thing. Are you like shipping that as a thing yet? Like I know it's on NuGet as a preview because I'm using it because you built it for me because you're nice. And see, I do use other people's stuff sometimes.
Well, it was, but to be fair, it's because you wanted the strongly typed keys, but with the dependency injected values. Now, I dependency inject my localization, not because I believe that it needs to be separated, but I've had 2 massive projects where we had a multi-tenanted setup, and the customer, you know, if they're paying $1 million, man, you're pretty much going to do whatever they ask, right?
Yeah.
So we had certain tenants that wanted certain wording for certain fields. So, you know, shipping the out of the box resource files didn't work for them. So we had to get rich, right? And then localizations would kind of come in over time. And you had Quebec French that didn't match France French because apparently Quebec French is fake, which I'm not surprised, right? So controversy. Don't shoot me. I'm Canadian.
No, it's funny because like, you know, we obviously grew up learning Quebec French in school. I mean, I'm assuming that they taught you French too. We're not that far different in age.
Right.
And you know, then you would know a little bit. And like, I just remember going to France a handful of times, and like anything you tried to speak, they're like, 1, I know you're not French at all. 2, I know you're trying to speak French, but it's like Canada French, it's Quebec French. And then the opposite, right? You go to Quebec and they're like, you know, if you didn't speak the Quebec French, well, get out of here.
They know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but as Canadians, we're very accustomed to having to do localization.
Right.
Right. So you had to have strongly typed keys, which I get, you know, it's got to be that way, but you still had to have the dependency injection just in case.
Yep.
So a lot of people are using extensions for that. I hate it because it takes away again from my view model, and my view model is going to use those keys anyways. So I wish people would stop doing it.
No,
again, pick what works.
I really like the way that it's set up with the source generator and stuff. I think that's a nice thing. And like localization is just hard, you know, no matter what. So it's
I guess I'm so used to it now. It doesn't really faze me anymore. It's just a lot of extra copying and pasting, which I hate.
But even like, I mean, like maybe this another episode idea, localization. Like we could do. I remember back in the Xamarin days, this being a thing, and there was a tool at one point that would go and like find any strings that you used in the source code, extract that out, make that like the localization, you know, resource dictionary, whatever you want to call it, and then you would go get translations, and it knew how to like inject those back in and stuff, right? But there was like even resource files, I believe there's still cases that doesn't really fully solve. So yeah, there's probably room for doing more interesting things there with your source generator and again, not using extensions.
I wonder if AI has improved auto localization now.
Maybe. Well, yeah, that's a whole other thing too, right? Is like, oh, yeah, I'm just gonna go like use Google Translate. It's like, yeah, that might not be the best idea if you don't have anybody who knows like how to verify the results.
You know, I did that in the past, and then I handed those translations off to somebody that was like full French here in Canada.
Yeah.
And they were like, what is this? Now, this is going back literally 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure that things have come a lot further.
Probably.
But that's how I did it. I translated and they were like,
well, that's an interesting idea. Cause like, yeah, you could almost, I feel like if you could give Copilot or whatever GPT, whatever model you're using, like you know, give them your strings to translate, but then give it like a blurb of context, right? It's probably going to do an okay job. Even if you said like, hey, this is, you know, this entry is for a button in an app that talks about doing this, like, you know, and then they would be able to translate it to another language with that context.
There we go.
It's an idea.
I bet you they tell you not to use a XAML extension to do it though.
I bet you're right. Copilot probably is like, here you go, but just whatever you do, don't you dare use that XAML extension.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, that's all I'm saying. Less XAMLization, more view modeling.
Yeah, well, and so back to the whole converter thing. Okay, so you have two converters. There's going to be people on both sides of the camp, right? Of like do more in the view area, do more in the view model area because it's simpler and it's not that big of a deal. Like you can still write a view model that leaks through some of the kind of UI oriented aspect of it. That's not going to like be the end of the day, end of the world,
Right.
end of your life, right? Like it's fine. However, talking about converters, like it would be nice if they were easier to actually use, or if like we could do more of that in XAML, right? That's one of the things I love about the idea of like Razor and stuff is that you can do some of those types of like mutations in your view code and it's not really heavy, right? Like if I'm just like saying, oh, I have this string, and I want to like, or maybe a better case is like I have some currency value or something, right? And I want to format it as such. I know we can do that with the built-in string stuff, but like let's pretend you couldn't. That would be a nice case to be able to just like have a way to write a little bit of C# code that like did the thing that you wanted to do to that property from the view model, but you didn't have to use a converter. You didn't have to use another property on your view model. And like, that's something that doing Blazor, like the WASM stuff in my app felt really freeing. It's like, oh, I can do that kind of stuff here. It's easy. So,
and you got away with it. It works. That's really what it matters at the end of the day. It works. So as much as I say, don't do these things, right? It's only experience.
yeah.
I've worked with a lot of apps and I've seen these things go more wrong than right.
So you're
where
in
my
the camp
experience
of
goes.
like to do something like that. No, I'd still rather do it in the view model so that like I can maybe test that the actual string coming out is correct or something like that.
Now I know how to avoid getting that data points mixed up, right? So when we're talking about converters,
Yeah.
So one where converters tend to work, but I still don't need to use them as I convert other ways is something like a map, right? So when you put a pin on a map, it's obviously a collection of two doubles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're probably going to pass, like if I'm putting a pin on it, for instance, I'm probably going to put some sort of piece of data on that, like a description
Yep.
or an image, right?
Yep.
So I can define that in my view model as a record and say, this is the 4 points of data that I want to create for a pin.
Mm-hmm.
That pin's not UI based. It's still data based, right? So I can ship it over and say, when I ship this over to my view model, I can have my code behind decide, oh, right. Okay. You're telling me there's a new pin. It's going to go and put the pin on the map and it's going to do it in the UI, right? So it's going to find the named reference to my Google map or whatever. And it's going to translate that type that the view model just kind of signaled. And then it's going to put it on the map. But I didn't have a UI type leak across, right? I just kind of transferred it.
Yeah.
Could I have done it with a converter? Yeah, probably, but definitely not as easy, right?
Well, depending what the source of data looks like too, right? Like where is that coming from, I guess? Like did you create you created a new
observable.
Yeah, I just mean in terms of like what, like is the observable giving you a more complex data object? Like
Yes.
So
I'm emitting it, so it's not really
you're kind
an
of
NPC.
reducing it down to a more simple data type in that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's still unit testable because I don't need to emerge
Yep.
the UI types, which that's a big deal. Now,
Well,
all of that
and that's
said,
that's kind of if I'm gonna try and be unbiased here, like that is one potential advantage of type converters is they are unit testable.
yes, yeah, you beat me to it. I was about to say you can unit test a type converter. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but you're kind of blurring the lines, right? I mean, these days, if you're going to go that far, you may as well go all the way in terms of like writing an automated test, right? So the unit test will get you some of your metrics on the view models, so all the companies can check their box, right? We got our unit test coverage that we wanted, and now we're running the automated tests. So there's a bit of a line, right? I have always managed to get by with my two converters and avoiding other converters and extensions I never use. Never have I used a XAML extension. Am I stupid?
No, I mean,
don't know.
Never. I've looked at them. So one of the things, like we talked about this quite a while ago now, actually, I think, just the idea of like, hey, what are some things that would make XAML nicer, right? Like
Yep.
in some of the same veins of these conversations, of these points that we're talking about. So markup extensions like that gives you, a way to maybe do some interesting things with it. And I had started kind of even looking at, is there a way I can use markup extensions to do something that's a little bit easier for doing some of like the conversion stuff, like type converter stuff. And I didn't get too far with it. I think I ran into some problems for the exact scenario that I wanted to do. But there's some maybe interesting ones out there. I'm struggling to think of like where I might use any of them today though.
Now looking at C# markup, there actually, from what I've dealt with, there really isn't a need for type converters at all, because you can do a lot of that cool casting stuff and it just works, right? Like type converters are more to deal with the XAML lack of context, I guess, for the best.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way I've seen it, is that C# markup, you just don't need it. You don't need the type converters. It's implicit.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Right?
that's what I'm saying, kind of like with doing like the Razor stuff too, right? Like in the sense you're kind of just writing code inline where you need it to do something that you would maybe use a converter to do.
Right. And in Blazor and HTML, everything's a string at the end of the day, of the day anyways, right? So
Yeah.
it's more or less the same stuff, right? Now, what's the other thing in terms of XAML stuff? Behaviors. That was the one I was looking for.
Okay.
Now, behaviors I have used. Now, I haven't really had to port too many over because I find I can just do it in handlers easier now.
Okay.
For certain things like
So are you like mapping, like doing your own mapper stuff on existing handlers to kind of get at, changing things on the native level? Like is that what you were using, you would maybe have used a behavior for?
Yeah, so something like focused was a big one. So there was like you wanted to know when a text, like an entry. So I just did one of these recently, and I'm pretty sure it was fully handler. I'm old, I forget. Anyhow, what it was in the original, it was a behavior when the focused event fired, right? So I bound the behavior to the entry. When the focused event was fired, I bound a property to say is focus true. And vice versa for when it wasn't focused. So that's not, because it's an event, it's not something that's easily bindable. You could do one of those event binding things, blah, 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 blah. But for this part, a behavior was easy. It did the focus. It did exactly what it needed to. And that way I could do things like change the border color, right? Or I don't know, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do, because focus is achieved.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the behaviors that I have in my app too now, just to kind of familiarize myself with them again. And I have a few. I don't have many, but like it is a nice way to kind of get at the native controls in a pretty simple manner. Like one of the things that with the handlers, like it's much easier than renderers were back in the day. Like you can basically update the mappers, the property mappers or whatever, and have your own thing run, and you get access to the instance of like the platform control, and then you can do your stuff there. I never remember like offhand how to like do that pattern correctly. And so
it's a weird one too.
It is a little bit weird. And even though like I'm fine with making my own handlers completely for things like that, I'm like exposing controls that are like new things. But yeah, when I go to like alter an existing one, I always kind of forget how to do it. And honestly, behaviors are, the thing I like about them from a Maui perspective. So like with the behavior, you get the unattached to method that you override, right? So that's like when your behavior is going to actually be attached to the control instance. And at that point, you can do a bunch of different things. And one of the things,
whatever you want at that point.
Basically whatever you want. But then like one of the other things that you do I find myself doing often is when just because like you're attached to the control doesn't mean things are all like set up and you're able to access it properly either, depending on the platform especially. And so I end up like subscribing to the loaded event for the view. And then I know once that loaded event has fired, and I unsubscribe to and clean up after myself because, I'm good.
All right.
After that's fired, then I know like things are set up and I can start, altering that native control where sometimes you can't until that event has happened. Especially, I think Windows was particularly bad about that. If the control wasn't loaded yet and you tried to like do something to it, it might just crash. Like you might get an exception, right? So,
Windows.
yeah. So I have a few. I do ones like on Android. So on my pool app, I've totally created like my own Frankenstein control, right? And so I do things like remove the outline from the controls on all the platforms because I kind of draw my own Chrome around it. And
That's what everybody does, though. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're in, obviously it not being consistent in how that looks across platforms to start is usually a catalyst for wanting to do that. In my case, it's that plus some other stuff too. So I end up doing stuff like that. You're gonna like this one. I have one that I call the round the corners behavior, and it's literally named that because I don't know why not. And
It's just a border, right?
well, it's not. It's letting me compress the control hierarchy so that I don't have to put a border around a thing. So if I have a grid, I don't want to put a border around it because that's 2 control instances I have to deal with now. So I
John didn't pass my metric. The first question I always ask is, do you have a performance problem?
did though. Well, I did.
You're
okay?
oh, you did not on a control.
Yeah.
Did you really? Or was it
I have
was it like 30 nanoseconds and you were like, this has to be optimized?
Okay. There's 2 parts to this. I did in earlier Maui days when performance wasn't as great. Like in the net 6 days bleeding into the early net 7 days. It like there were times on Android especially where like loading a page that had a whole bunch of controls on it took a long time, like not acceptable.
How many controls are we talking about?
Oh,
Just eyeball it. Just eyeball it.
yeah, I'm opening the app and I want to see. It's got to be like 30 different controls at least.
And you were having
In early days, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like we've obviously made things better because it's not that bad anymore. But it used to be not great for some of those things. I can't even find my app anymore. There it is. Yeah, like in the pool settings page, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15, 18, 20. Yeah, probably about 30 different like entry fields and this isn't just like, I'm not counting like every image or anything. Like there's those as well on many of those. So like there's like 30 entries and text or check boxes and stuff like that. So it was a lot.
All right.
Anyway.
All right.
Anyway.
I mean, I've seen a lot more controls on a page with
I know, but it was slow. It was slow. Probably if I did it again today, I wouldn't feel the same way. But now that I'm like, have that optimization and it works for me and I like it, I'm going to keep it. So yeah, I can basically assign this behavior to like a grid or, a vertical stack layout or whatever. And it alters the platform specific control to put like a nice border around it with a corner radius and a background color and clips it and all that. It's very nice.
All right. I'm just nodding at John right now in agreement. Not really agreeing, but whatever works.
It's one of those like,
he works. He knows it.
Okay, sure. Yep. You're good.
He knows it, but that's all right. It's all right. It still works. It still works.
Works
again,
great.
At the end of the day, if it works, that's great. Would I do that in a traditional app right now? If you had an app for a customer where the app is 100 plus screens, probably not. Probably not. Probably got bigger fish to fry. But that's all right. It works for John, and Pool Math is working well. So there you go.
That's right. That's right.
But do you have unit tests, John?
I do.
What?
Yeah.
No. I know you have DI in that thing because you bought into that a while ago.
Yeah. I have. So to be fair, okay. So my unit tests are largely around the actual calculations and math for like the pool chemistry stuff. So like that maybe you don't even count because it's more the like I'm testing. Given the inputs, does the output match like the calculation I want.
Probably a pretty darn good thing to be unit testing because that's the core of your app, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't want to screw that up, right? So don't want to mess that up. So that's a lot of them. I don't have a lot of like unit testing, like the view models and the patterns around them, but I do have some UI tests as well. Those are old, but I've kind of kept them working. They're all Appium based now, and mostly I have them because I want to have an easy way to take all the screenshots when I update the app so that I can update the store listings.
All right.
But it's on my list to add, some actual more, now that I've done the work to have a proper, or encapsulation, I guess maybe you want to call it, of my logic. It's all unit testable now. Like my view models would, and my navigation service could be not mocked out. I can do all that. I just haven't done it yet.
Now here's a good question, because you're doing a lot in Blazor, right? Mm-hmm. You got some UI in Blazor. So obviously now the more XAML you have, the harder it is to bring over to Blazor. Would that be a fair? Because so again, I don't mind XAML at all. I like XAML. It is verbose. I don't want carpal tunnel. So I do what I need to do in XAML. I get in, I get out. I love grids. I love the way it lays out. What I don't love, like I said, is the converters, the extensions, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But if in a world, as we look forward 10 years down the line, and this is just my 2 cents, John's not going to put his stamp of approval on it. God knows nobody at Microsoft will. But I don't see XAML. I see a world where, unfortunately, web wins, which sucks because there's too many divs. There's already enough divs. And I do like XAML. I do like C# markup. But I think web just wins at some point. So the more XAML heavy you are, the harder it'll get to Blazor. And maybe that's a case you never have to worry about. But as I look at customers, some of the hard screens, especially around stuff like collection view, some people go so crazy that some of those things, and I think I've talked about like the responsive grid layouts that I've had to do, like where the columns are different sizes, like it's not just an equal grid point. You're going to do those. I've done those in Blazor and been quite successful, right?
Yeah.
But the more XAML heavy it's been, obviously the harder it is to bring over, the harder it is to do because you've got all that logic tied up. Whereas if it was just in the view model, right, it was very easy to just say, use this data, here's the layouts, go do your thing. Because CSS does like responsiveness fantastically.
I mean, my experience was really not that it was challenging from the view model perspective to do what I needed to do. It was like, I really just took like, okay, I have this XAML page. It's going to be a Razor component. I have this, I do like, well, here's another thing for XAML. Like, I don't know how much you make use of like, user controls, I guess, if you want to call them that, right? Like a XAML content control based on whatever. So I tend to divide stuff up like that. Like for my app's home screen, it's basically showing an overview of like what your chemical levels are at. So it's kind of like the 5 or 6, depending on how your pool's configured, different cards that show like for your free chlorine levels, like what's the last date you did a test on, what's the current level at. Do I want to show like an indicator that says like, hey, this needs attention because it's not looking good? So like that card is like, I put that into a control, right? So that becomes a Razor component as well. So it was pretty simple in that sense. It really was just like, how do I make this XAML appear in HTML? The actual like getting the data connected, I mean, my view models just plugged right in for the most part, and it was pretty simple.
Well, and if we go back a second and we talk about XAML with custom controls, think about how much stuff has to go into those binding points, right? Mm-hmm. So just if I have, let's say, a label and an entry, right? So I put them together as like a form field, right? So it's because you can't really have an entry without saying what it is. Mm-hmm. Could do placeholders, whatever. But let's just say we have a label and an entry. So now I'm obviously not going to open up all the bindable points on the label, and I'm not going to open up all the bindable points on the entry, and there's going to be overlap there. So how do you deal with that, right?
Yeah.
Well, you don't. You really open up what you need, but that's still a lot, right?
Yeah, and it's a lot of C# code even, right? Like to create the bindable properties and to wire it all up. Yeah, and I think in that sense, like moving over to Razor components for that same thing was quite a bit easier because it wasn't, it's a parameter, right? Like it's so much less ceremony to build the thing.
Exactly. And now I know there's stuff like source generators out there now that help
Yep.
with like the statics. Have you used them? I
No.
don't personally use them. I usually just do that stuff. I've got like some snippets and I go bang, 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 type
Yep.
in my stuff. It works. It's not ideal, but it works. But again, still that's the raw stuff. That's what I'm talking about. It's all that XAML verbosity and typing. That's where I tend to worry about those things. And I've seen companies put so much into that, and it's great. But again, if you focus on the controls, you're pretty good. You focus on handlers, you can get rid of stuff like behaviors and all that stuff. But don't get wild with those converters or extensions. I'm telling you, I have not seen good. I want to be proven wrong. John, yours doesn't count because you're the only owner. You don't have a team to work with, so it's
Yeah.
not fair. It's when it's a team.
And I feel like
And then
the
you can create
markup
duplicates.
extension stuff, though, like that's not. I mean, I'm sure there are people that are making their own and using it that way, but I think like that was more a thing for like almost the actual Maui implementation too, right? It's because we have like markup extensions that, unless if maybe I'm not understanding the breadth of what you mean by extensions either, but there's
Markup
things
extensions.
like so there's things like. I use now in XAML, the like stroke shape has a markup extension where you can specify a nice little tidy string that mentions both the shape that you want to use, and if it's a rounded rectangle, you can also put the corner radius in it too, right?
So it's
All
like
in like
It's like the fast way of doing like a grid row definition.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, which
Okay.
is that's the same idea thing too, right? So like they're
So you're
handy for that.
saving me carpal tunnel syndrome.
And there might be more markup extension-y things that we could put into Maui itself, or maybe the community toolkit adds some that do kind of neat things there too. But like, I don't think that's something I would generally build for my own use that much.
Okay.
I'd have to have a
See?
really compelling case.
Education. That's what I'm looking for. Is what the heck do you use these things? Please don't use them for localization, though.
Oh, I was
But
just going to
anything
say
else?
like that was maybe
that's the one
a
I've
case
seen.
that I looked at, but I didn't end up doing that because I wanted the strongly typed stuff, right? So
Yep, and that's all I'm saying is that the places where I've seen them used, I haven't seen them used appropriately, in my opinion.
yeah,
But there's also stuff like I think we use this as one of our nougats of the week. One time was compiled.
yeah. I was just
bindings.
going to say you're probably going
And
to say the same
compiled
thing.
bindings is essentially everything's a markup extension when you look at it, right? Even the binding is essentially a markup extension. But Xbind was the one that. Now, I don't know why I don't use it more. Do you use it extensively?
I had
Not
it
yet.
in my app, and then I just kind of like started trying to look at it and got sidetracked with something, and I just never
Forgot
got back
about
to
it.
it. Yeah,
Because
because like in theory, this is the thing that maybe would be it would be good for me to go and revisit my converters and see like that could be using this compiled bindings Xbind stuff instead of a converter, because a lot of my stuff is like super simple, right?
Well, and it's great for those cases where, so if you've got like a multi-binding, right? So you can go not this off
Yeah.
the data type, but is equal to this. Like you could do those, and you could do like a straight exclamation not, and you could do an and or an or right there, right? Which is it's quite powerful. I don't know how fast it is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's called compiled bindings.
I was
but
going
is
to
it
say,
really
like, I think
compiled, or is it evaluated?
claim is that it is all compiled. I don't know in practice,
looked.
what it looks like, but it's
But it
certainly
does look interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly.
And I know, like I said, C# markup gets around that because they don't need to do any of that. Like it's just
Right.
kind of comes natively out of the box. Now, another project where I've seen kind of those bindings, and this goes outside of XAML, but if we look back, I like bringing up MVVM cross because I think like the .NET mobile world learned so much from that.
Yeah.
And all the experiments that Stuart did
Yeah,
there.
I think a lot of like Xamarin Forms, took some informing from that work too, right? Like,
Right. So he had the bindings for, against like the Android markup and
yeah,
the iOS. Well, iOS was a bit different, but it was very powerful. Like he had like the Xbind stuff back in those days, right? Which wasn't like pure XAML WPF style. It didn't exist yet. This was before Xamarin Forms. And it was beautiful. The binding just worked. I think he had a cool nickname for it because that seemed to be something that he did.
Yeah.
Right. And it had all those powerful things. How fast it was comparatively, I guess I never saw an issue, but
I mean, I know, companies used it. Well, I know, like I said, I think before too, like Greg Shackles, like when they were using Xamarin for their app at Olo there, they were MVVM cross, at least for, the first several years. And it fit really nicely with Android. Like when you were doing the Android, layouts in XML, right? The AXML.
Yeah, the binding syntax was right there.
Yeah, like you're right. It's kind of like reminiscent, or maybe XAML is reminiscent of what they did there, like you're saying. But it fit very nicely. I liked it.
It was obviously XAML came probably first, but
I mean, yeah, like Windows
stuff.
XAML, I'm sure, WPF or whatever.
And I know MVVM Cross ended up going more to the expression-based binding, so like the C# markup style. I mean, obviously that's the preference, but now with stuff like data types and kind of the compiled XAML, you don't really notice that the same. So maybe it's a case to look at XBind again, or this compiled bindings again, because we can't make it our plugin of the week twice in a row, but it's something I'd love to try again.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me want to like go in and spend an hour and just like see how many converters I can rip out and use XBind instead. So maybe I'll have to do that.
Oh, there we go. I've started Jon on a mission.
The other thing too, that like talking about compiled bindings, that not everybody necessarily always knows, right? Like this is shamefully something I didn't do in my own app until I migrated it to Maui, which was to actually declare the data type that you're using, right? Because it's like right there is a almost free instant performance boost, right? If you're able to articulate the data type in your XAML so that the XAML compiler knows, hey, I know what this is. I can actually like emit better code that's not going to be invoked dynamically at runtime to the same extent and do the thing.
And it warns you now. Yeah, and IntelliSense, but it warns you now too when you haven't done that. It's like, this is now interpreted. Enjoy.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of funny we're talking about it. This is an issue that just kind of came up too, or not that just came up, but I was talking to Stefan on my team, who's the kind of the he
is the XAML guy.
The XAML guy, yeah. Where if now with Maui, because like we're not running XAML compiler, XAML C at debug time, right? We do kind of like a different version that's trying to help identify issues, but if you debug your app, it's doing everything dynamically, like all full dynamic bindings. There's nothing compiled in debug mode. And so what happens sometimes is either if you specify a data type, but then at runtime you're like giving it not an instance of that type, in debug mode, it's going to like try and reflect over the properties, and it might just work fine because the property name that you bound to exists on the type that you gave it, even though it's not the data type that you told it was going to be. Because truthfully at debug, we don't care about what you say the data type is basically. But if you start then building your app in release mode, basically it's just going to not like work sometimes, right? It's going to say, oh, and I think what's happening is it thinks of it as basically doing like a binding context as, the declared data type that you gave it. And if that fails, you've got like a null instance essentially that you can't get the property value out of. So you might have a label that in debug mode has text, but because you declared you declared a data type that's different from the one you gave it at runtime, suddenly your label has no text when you build for release mode. And it's not
implode, no?
Well, it's
one of those hard.
It's complicated. Yeah.
You can always tell when John's about to say that.
Yeah. So we're going to try and do something to make that a better, experience in terms of like discovering those cases, but it's not as simple as you might hope it is, which is just the story of life.
Now, the last thing I wanted to bring up, so this isn't in our notes. I love to spring these things, but I know this is truthful, is the great Jonathan Peppers. I'm pretty sure I can quote him on this.
Sure.
He's like the performance guy, right? Mm-hmm. He's the Maui performance guy. He's the guy that goes in and digs. He'll dig the
speed
deepest
scope files.
Yeah, he'll dig as deep as he has to, right?
Yep.
So I know he has mentioned, and I know a lot of us know this from the past, right? Like converters obviously imply a lot of extra overhead, right? So when you're using them simple in forms and like one-offs, it's not a big problem. When you use them in a collection view where performance is already a bit of a fight, they get really bad because now we're working with, sometimes a lot of converters, and they will slow down the binding of those items a lot, right? Because everything's, especially ones with like data templates where it's flipping around the types. I've seen it, right? You take the converters out and it's almost an immediate improvement visually, let alone like right down to a timed level. So I know I read recently, John Peppers came out and said, yeah, if you're using converters in a collection view, you're going to have problems. That's as far as he needed to go. But it's true. I've seen it, right?
Should I tell you that I use converters in my collection view templates in my app still?
Hey, well, I'm just the bearer of the news. Don't.
Yeah, no, I minimized them, but I still use some of them. And then again, it got to the point where I'm like, this is working fine. I don't actually need to dig farther. But if I did, I'd probably go after them.
But again, you don't have a problem, so why engineer a solution for a problem you don't have?
So
but in some of these apps I've seen, yeah, exactly, right? And there's customers I work with that want to optimize everything, and you're like, dude, that last 2%. So to get that,
you really want to pay
last 2%
for that last 2%,
is going to cost you, like 80 hours. Why? Don't dig. Wait until customers say this is a problem, then dig, right? Because now you have value. Like a cost associated with the value,
right?
But some of them want to, whatever. This is a case where you didn't have to. Converters are working fine in your collection view. Are you using your virtual list view though?
I am. Although I did a branch recently because like we've got kind of a current effort of looking at collection view performance just kind of across the board all up because we know it's an area that people are still wanting a better experience around, and there's still issues and there are some legitimate concerns around performance and things we can do to fix them. So I did switch back to collection view on a branch just to see where are we at today? Because for my app, one of the use cases was I have a data template selector, and then I have probably 5 different data templates that could be selected, and they're not there's not really a consistent pattern, right? It's like whenever you add a log, if you're adding like an expense log or a chemical test log or an addition log or a note log or whatever other logs I have, it's however you add them in your app, right? So there's no like pattern to the order that these things show up. And back in the day in Forms and still into early days in Maui and till I think Net 8, it was all fixed. Our data template selector code for collection view, on both Android and iOS, basically was like for any kind of data template, it only kept track of one type of data template, and it would, as it's recycling templates, it's like, oh, this isn't the type of data template that the selector wants. I'm still going to use this, but I'm going to get rid of the thing that was in there and put the new thing in. And so it kept churning over and over every time a new template was needed. It had to rebuild on a recycled cell, right? And so I did a PR a while back that basically was no, let's track, the recycled cells per type that we get back from the data template selector. So we have a pool of each type that you're using, right?
Yep.
Instead of getting one from the pool and being like, oh, that's the wrong one, I need to make a new one over and over again. Keep track of that. So it has gotten a lot better.
And here's the thing: if we're looking at that and we're putting in converters are very eval based, are they not? Right? They're not really.
There's gonna be reflection because it's all to an extent, right? Because it's all objects coming in, so there's casts and stuff, and it maybe isn't that horrible, but.
It from what I've seen is that they're all eval based because they have to be, right? It has to reflect them out. It has to do the thing, but that's all a cost. So reflection's usually cheap. One-offs, a couple times in a form, not a big deal. Those collection views, like I said, some of these customers are using a lot of these converters right now, even in an item. There's one performance case I'm tackling right now Now, their main problem is they've got stack layouts out the wazoo.
Well,
It's
that's
too many stack
another
layouts.
point maybe to talk about as well, right?
Well, and a lot of people, okay, so that's a great one in terms of XAML. A lot of people want to use stacks because they're very easy, right? Stack here,
And you
stack
just
there.
keep nesting stacks all over.
But the problem that happens there is more measurements, right? So it has to measure the innermost guy to get the measurements to the outermost guy, right?
And
it's
I
like a
think
bubbling effect.
I could be wrong at this point because I mean I don't get to touch code as much as I used to back in the day at this point in life, but I think we might still end up instantiating like a platform view for most layouts. I don't know if we've compressed that down or not. So I might be wrong. We might have optimized that away finally. But I suspect not. And so every time you add another level of these layouts, like you're getting another platform native control backing it. I think that's where we are still.
Right. And so these layouts, these stack layouts, especially within a grid, again, people do them because, I mean, you're old enough to have done tables in HTML, right?
Yeah.
Tables were great. They were.
yeah.
They're hated now. Nobody used to. You do it.
I know. I still write HTML, and I'm like, well, what do I do tables
What do
now?
you do
Everyone's
now?
using these things.
These divs. Everybody uses a div now. Well, how the hell do I use that? But anyhow, it was a big thing to use tables, and it was very comfortable, right? Because you knew exactly how it was going to lay out in a grid. Now, for some reason, because XAML is so easy to do these layouts, right? So you can be like, I want these two things grouped together, right? So going back to our form item, right? So I might do, listen, I'm going to put that in a horizontal. So there's the label, there's my entry, it's horizontal. I can set the buff, the padding, etc. Done. Next element, right? And then all those horizontal layouts go in one big vertical layout. So it's easy, it's comfortable, it's a natural look, but what it's not is performant. So I've switched this one particular view. It's a big view into a grid layout. Now you have to do stuff like remembering which row you're in, which column you want it in, where you've got the spans. Like it can be a lot. It's not natural like a table was, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have
It's
to.
not hard.
It's not hard, but it does.
You just have to think a bit.
You have to do your mental math of, okay, what row and what column am I in? Whereas with table rows and table data, you knew where you were, right? Relatively.
Yeah.
So people tend to go with the stack layouts, and they're shooting themselves in the foot the same time they're doing it because it's comfortable. It's a comfortable way of doing it in XAML, right? It's essentially doing table datas with table rows. That's what it's doing.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
So don't do that, and don't nest a whole stack of them and think that you're going to get good performance on a list that's scrolling, right? Like
this collection view couldn't size itself properly. It's slow when it starts scrolling. Like,
well, this is
really
another
slow.
thing, right? So like the talking about vertical stack layouts and scroll views and collection views, like people tend to nest weird combos of controls that all want to kind of compete for infinite space in one of the dimensions, right? So like having a vertical stack layout, usually is okay in like a data template, cell if it's like
One
the
off.
outer.
Go one off.
It's fine. But then, we'll see people do stuff like put a collection view inside a scroll view, and like they're both vertical oriented too. And they're like, why is this not working well? Because they both want to take up infinite space, and it's not sure how to handle that kind of stuff. So be smart about how you nest stuff like that too.
Well, and that's this is again where XAML is powerful and also pain is if we look at something like, so that scenario you just talked about, it's usually people that have like a dashboard. They want to show like the top 5 items for this, the top 5 items for that. And they're like, well, a collection view, that's how you do a list. Well, no, it's actually not.
It's pretty
a
heavy if
bindable
your list
stack.
is, exactly.
It's a bindable stack layout or a bindable grid. And
if you don't
can
have
just render. And that's going to
list-
render the size. Like it's not going to virtualize it, obviously.
Right,
It's just going to, this is what you get.
But with trying to virtualize, there's weight that you incur trying to do that. So if you don't have like a lot of items to scroll through, just use the bindable stack layout.
And then that way you can have one scroll view. It's not going to be virtualized, but you limit the types.
And you
I've
can
got
get
some
away
of those
with
that work.
You can get away with
fine.
quite a few controls in that scenario with it being still very performant, right? Like
More than
it's
30.
Not,
More than 30.
I know. Hey, I'm just saying. You wouldn't have been able to do that back in the day either. So
I had to make the dad jokes somewhere. Now, this is the thing, right? So a lot of these troubles are because of XAML and because of the comfort of XAML. So that's why we like to point out, like, these are the things that I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm just saying in experience, these are the things that people do in XAML that tend to hurt and cause pain. I realize it's a comfortable way of doing it and it looks like the right way to doing it, but it probably or might not be. Always check the other side. But
Yeah, exactly.
for all that's holy, please do localization in your view model. That one I'll die on. Is that fair? I can die on that hill?
I think so. Yeah, I
I'll
think
die on that hill.
I'm mostly like that. So I'll agree to it until I go outside of that box.
All right. Somebody can, set fire to a comment or something.
Oh, the other thing, looking through some of my code too, if we're talking still optimizations, like if you've got kind of like a abstracted out, user control, people tend to think that like you do the new item template and it's like a content view, right? Which is okay. But if you don't really need that to be like if you've got that and then you right underneath that, you put a grid in there, make the top level thing the grid, right? Like stop nesting stuff within itself. Like that user control file can be, and I did an audit of this because I have a fair bit of like user control kind of abstraction of things. And I found, in all my code too, I'm like, oh, I have like a lot of this redundant, like extra controls and stuff that are nesting just because I was too lazy to go change the item template from a content view to, a grid. And it's not hard to do. You change it in a couple places and then your grid is the direct thing, right? And then you just saved yourself one more layer of controls. So like there's lots of really easy ways to kind of optimize the XAML. But again, it's kind of like that's XAML making it kind of easy to do it the wrong way.
One of the things I also tend to see that since we're on that content view is people use it, and I'm guilty of this too, right? As using it as like an empty view holder, right? So it's like, let's say you've got, if you're in this mode, you show this content view, otherwise show this content view. They'll use that because it doesn't have any background. It's basically an empty holder, placeholder, right? So they'll do content view, and you'll probably do that in a stack layout. That's common. It's understandable, but that's, again, understand kind of what you're doing there.
Yeah.
That's another problem with XAML, though, is that you need to have that placeholder in a layout. You can't have placeholders and then say, put it in this layout, right? You can't really do that.
No, I mean, the only way, like I have cases of that too, where I've got like for my list, I have like a template and every item has a few of the same things in the same spot. And then I have kind of a content placeholder, which is a content view, but like I don't know the outer view of the kind of what goes in there for each thing always. So I haven't found a good way to kind of not nest that extra more than it needs to be yet. So sometimes you kind of have to. Maybe there's a way.
Maybe. Educate us. Somebody that knows this. Again, I've gotten by pretty good. I'd like to say my success ratio is pretty high. But I don't often tend to have to go too far outside of the box for XAML. I am doing a lot of C# markup these days.
Yeah, are you switching to that a little bit?
A lot of it, I am doing a lot more Blazor stuff for some of the apps I'm working on right now. Just because the views, like I said, that responsive layout, it's just web is easy to do it in. Yeah. I don't know that there's any layout natively like Swift UI. I tried to do it in Swift UI with like a dynamic grid based. Think like Pinterest. That's what I'm kind of talking about.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a hard one.
That's a complicated view. I have not seen anything out of the box. Anywhere.
The UI collection view, like the compositional layout stuff, is probably what maybe the best attempt at making that achievable, more generically speaking, that I've seen, but it's still not easy. Like you still have to think about it.
Yeah. So I didn't have success. I'm not a master UI specialist. I need a designer to make something pretty, and then I go, that's a grid. Great.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's the case where I run into. I'm like, I know we're gonna make some different, design choices here because this is not going to be easy to implement.
So that one, like I said, it's easy. I can go to like a Bootstrap or any of those HTML frameworks where this is common because it's a desktop pattern, right? And those responsive kind of, and it was just easier. It just was.
Yeah.
There was no, and that's fine. Pick what works for you. Was it as performant? I don't know. I mean, I did not like the experience.
Yeah. Well,
It was not XAML.
It was not XAML. And there are other, things out there that help with some of these areas too, right? Like what's your pick for the week for the plugins and packages and products?
My package of the week is a plugin, I don't want to call it a plugin. It's not a plugin. It's a control library. It's the Sharpnado collection view.
Mm-hmm.
It is an absolutely beautiful piece of work by Jean-Marie Alfonsi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Speaking of saying, whatever, using the wrong French.
Yes, it sounds French.
I'm assuming.
But
maybe I'm
know.
wrong. Sorry if I'm wrong.
If we're wrong, we apologize. Feel free to slap us.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a good comedian anyways. If you've ever seen his tweets, he's hilarious. So feel free to slap us if we said your name wrong. I'm fine with it.
Love the Sharpnado work always.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That thing, so I just did a grid with it recently. Very performant. So John's does the list view very performant. His does the grid, the bindable grid, very performant. It has some wonderful infinite paging stuff in it too that works fantastic. By the way, I have PR coming for you for grid spans, but
and there's
not you, John.
I mean, no. The collection view stuff is great, but like there's some other Sharpnado stuff out there too that's equally cool, right? Like different libraries too.
Gets my stamp of approval. He's got tabs. He's got some.
It's got like the task
view.
loader thing, right? Like the kind of skeleton UI or like lazy loading stuff.
Bunch of great ones. But the collection view is my pick this week. It was fantastic. It performs well. It does bindable grids. Very nice. Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss to that one.
If it's got Windows support yet, though.
Oh, well, I won't even get started on that. Don't see, you poke the bear on purpose. I'm going to say something nasty about Windows, but I won't. He's trying. He's just trying to instigate. But you gave me a rule saying just be nice. So I'm being nice.
Windows is easier now. There's more APIs that we can use now for that kind of stuff. Yep.
No,
just for the collection view part of it. That's all.
Okay. Just
like building the virtual list view. The hardest platform has been iOS, hands down.
Okay. You're still antagonizing. Just Windows is not. It's not a fun territory to play in. I'm happy to be told otherwise. It still won't. I'm going to be the rock, the immovable object on this one. Web, iOS, Android, and even Android I hate sometimes. iOS is iOS is just perfection. It's just perfection, mostly.
All right. Well, go. Maybe go write some XAML. Go check out the compiled bindings in your apps. Let me know how it goes, Alan, so that I can decide if I want to try and do that activity.
All right, I'll be the guinea pig. That's fine.
Great. Yeah. And everyone else out there too. If you want to check those things out, we'll put some links in the show notes. The other thing that's worth checking out, I don't know if you know about this, is leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
Oh,
that's worth checking out.
Yeah. I don't personally do that because, I don't listen to myself. You usually tell me if I'm too quiet.
Didn't I tell you to go leave
loud?
a review? Come on. I probably haven't left a review. I'm going to go leave a review today. So,
no. Is it going to mock me?
No, it's going to be a 5-star, just really propping things up, getting all the reviews. Oh, the other thing that we haven't talked about yet, I don't know if this one will be yet. We're going to start trying to push some of these to YouTube. So I've been trying to keep my background more cleaned up. I don't know if you've put any effort into yours.
No, but I can. I have my nice toy collection, my lightsabers, my Lego collections.
I've just been removing the junk the kids leave there so that at least that's not there. That's all I mean by effort. I haven't really done more than that.
All right, I'll put some effort. I'll put some effort.
Yeah, maybe be checking us out on YouTube soon as well, where you could, when we get all the things set up, I don't even know all the stuff I need to ask for on YouTube, like and subscribe and all that stuff. So we'll figure it out. Or if, you want to tell us how to do it, drop us a line. You can always go to the website, gonemobile.io, and leave feedback one of the many ways. If you have episode ideas, I don't think we're too short on them yet, but, never a bad idea to consider a topic that maybe we haven't covered or thought of covering. So send us some info. I think that'll do it for today. See you later. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.